The morning started like every other day at Carter Industrial Motors, but something felt different in the air. Workers moved faster than usual. Machines were loud, and supervisors kept checking their watches. Everyone knew the CEO was coming. Daniel Carter was known for two things: success and anger. He built the company from nothing, and he expected perfection from everyone. Today, production was behind schedule, and that made him furious. He walked through the factory floor with sharp eyes, followed by managers who looked nervous. Workers avoided eye contact. No one wanted to be the reason for his bad mood. Then Daniel stopped. Near the back of the workshop, one man worked calmly while chaos moved around him. The old mechanic sat beside an open engine, carefully cleaning a small part as if he had all the time in the world. His name was Elias. Most workers simply called him the quiet mechanic. Daniel frowned. "Why is he not moving faster?" he asked loudly. A supervisor hesitated. "Sir, he always works like that. But he fixes problems others can't." Daniel didn't like that answer. To him, speed meant effort. Comment laziness. He walked closer. "You," Daniel said sharply. "Do you know we were behind schedule?" Elias looked up slowly. His face was calm, almost tired, but his eyes were steady. "Yes," he replied quietly. "Rushing will break the machine again." The workers nearby stopped working. They could feel tension growing. Daniel's face hardened. "I don't pay people to move slowly. I pay them to work." Elias wiped his hands with a cloth and stood up. He was older than most workers, with gray hair and rough hands, but he stood straight. "The repair will be done right," Elias said calmly. "That saves more time." The CEO took that as disrespect. "In my company," Daniel said loudly so everyone could hear, "I decide what saves time." Silence spread across the workshop. No machine noise felt louder than that moment. Daniel pointed toward the exit. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave." Some workers looked shocked. Others lowered their heads. Elias had helped almost everyone at some point. He fixed machines after hours and never asked for extra pay. But no one dared to speak. Elias did not argue. He simply removed his gloves and placed them on the workbench. For a moment, he looked at the broken engine, then at the workers around him. His expression was calm, but there was something heavy behind his eyes. "As you wish," he said. He picked up a small toolbox and walked toward the exit. When he reached the door, he paused for just a second. Without turning around, he said quietly, "You may regret this decision." Then he left. Daniel laughed under his breath. "Dramatic," he muttered, turning back to his managers. "Replace him." But before anyone could move, a deep sound rolled across the sky. At first, workers thought it was thunder. Then the noise grew louder. The ground began to shake slightly. People looked up through the factory windows. A helicopter. Not just any helicopter. A dark Navy aircraft circled above the factory before slowly landing in the open yard outside. Wind and dust filled the air as workers rushed toward the windows in confusion. Daniel stepped outside, annoyed by the interruption. The helicopter doors opened. Two uniformed Navy officers stepped out, followed by armed personnel. Their movements were serious and urgent. One officer walked directly toward Daniel. "Are you the owner of this facility?" he asked. Daniel nodded, confused. "Yes. What is this about?" The officer looked around, scanning the area. His voice was firm. "We are looking for Commander Elias Grant." The name hit the air like a sudden shock. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His mind replayed the moment from minutes ago. The calm mechanic, the quiet voice, the man walking away with a toolbox. "That's impossible," Daniel said slowly. "He's just a mechanic." The officer's expression did not change. "No, sir," he replied. "He is not." Daniel turned toward the factory gate, his face losing color as realization slowly crept in. The man he had just fired was someone far more important than he ever imagined. The factory yard stayed silent long after the helicopter landed. Workers stood in small groups, whispering to each other. No one understood what was happening. Just minutes ago, Elias had been a quiet mechanic. Now Navy officers were asking for him like he was someone important. Daniel Carter tried to stay calm, but his thoughts were racing. "There must be a mistake," he said, forcing a small smile. "The man you're looking for just worked here. Fixed engines. That's all." The Navy officer looked directly at him. His expression was respectful, but serious. "Sir, Commander Elias Grant is not just a mechanic." The words made Daniel uncomfortable. Another officer stepped forward and showed a tablet screen. A photo appeared, Elias, younger, wearing a Navy uniform. His posture was strong, his face sharper, but it was clearly the same man. Daniel felt his throat go dry. "That's him," he admitted quietly. The officer nodded. Commander Grant served in special naval operations. Several missions remain classified. He saved many lives during overseas operations. 3 years ago, he resigned and disappeared. Workers who stood nearby exchanged shocked looks. The quiet man who helped them every day had once been a Navy commander. "Why would someone like that work here?" one worker whispered. No one had an answer. Daniel crossed his arms, trying to regain control of the situation. If he was so important, why was he fixing broken machines in my factory? The officer paused before answering. "Some people choose quiet lives after war." The sentence hung heavy in the air. Inside the workshop, workers slowly returned to their stations, but no one focused on work anymore. Memories began to surface. One worker remembered how Elias stayed late to fix a dangerous machine, so a young employee wouldn't lose his job. Another remembered how Elias stopped a conveyor belt seconds before it failed, preventing a serious accident. He never explained how he knew. He just acted. He never talked about himself, never complained, never asked for attention. Daniel suddenly remembered something too. Months ago, a major system failure almost shut down production. Elias had fixed it overnight without asking for help. Daniel had never even thanked him. The Navy officers searched the area, but Elias was gone. His locker was empty except for a small wrench and an old coffee mug. "He knew we were coming," one officer said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Ow!" The officer gave a small shrug. People like him notice things others don't. Outside, the helicopter blades remained still, waiting. Daniel watched the empty road leading away from the factory. A strange feeling grew inside him. Not fear, but something close to regret. He replayed the moment again in his head. The calm voice. The warning. "You may regret this decision." For the first time, Daniel wondered if he had made a mistake. A senior worker slowly approached him. "Sir," the man said carefully, "Elias wasn't lazy. He just worked differently. He always said machines tell you what's wrong if you listen." Daniel said nothing. The Navy officer stepped closer again. "If Commander Grant contacts you, you must inform us immediately. His skills are needed for an urgent operation." Daniel nodded automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. How could a man with that past choose to disappear into ordinary life? Why hide? As the officers prepared to leave, one of them turned back. "You should consider yourself lucky," he said quietly. "Not many people get the chance to meet someone like him." The helicopter lifted into the air, wind rushing across the factory yard once again. Dust filled the space where Elias had stood earlier that morning. When the noise finally faded, the factory felt different. Quieter. Empty in a way Daniel could not explain. He looked at the unfinished engine on the workbench, the one Elias had been repairing. For the first time, Daniel noticed something small written on a piece of tape near the engine. "Do it right. Not fast." Daniel stared at the words, his chest tightening. The man he fired was no longer just a mechanic. And now, he was gone. The factory did not feel the same after Elias left. Machines still ran. Workers still followed orders. But something was missing. The calm feeling that once existed in the workshop was gone. Small problems started appearing everywhere. Engines failed more often. Repairs took longer. Even the workers seemed quieter. Daniel Carter noticed it, though he refused to admit it out loud. For the first time in years, he stayed late at the factory. He walked through the workshop alone, stopping near the workbench where Elias used to work. The unfinished engine was still there. No one wanted to touch it. Daniel looked at it closely. The repairs seemed simple at first, but the deeper he looked, the more complicated it became. Elias had seen something others didn't. That thought bothered him. The next morning, Daniel called his senior managers into a meeting. "I want everything you know about that mechanic," he said. The managers exchanged confused looks. "Sir, there isn't much," one replied. "He applied 2 years ago. No differences." said he had mechanical experience. Worked hard. Never caused problems. That's it, Daniel asked sharply. Yes, sir. That made no sense. A Navy commander with no background? No history? Daniel dismissed the meeting early. Something about the situation felt unfinished, like a story missing its beginning. Later that day, an older worker named Harris approached him carefully. Harris had worked at the factory longer than anyone. Sir, Harris said, there's something you should know. Daniel looked up. Go on. Harris hesitated. About 6 months ago, there was almost a serious accident. The pressure system near line 3 failed. If it exploded, people could have died. Daniel frowned. He remembered a small shutdown, but nothing major. It never reached you, Harris continued, because Elias fixed it before it happened. Daniel sat back slowly. Why wasn't I told? Harris gave a sad smile. Because he asked us not to. Said panic helps no one. The words hit harder than Daniel expected. That evening, Daniel returned to his office and began searching through old company records. Hours passed. Files blurred together. Then something caught his attention. 3 years ago, when the company was struggling financially, a military contract suddenly saved them from bankruptcy. The approval signature on the document froze him in place. Ignorant. Daniel stared at the name. The contract had allowed his company to survive. Without it, Carter Industrial Motors would not exist today. His chest tightened as realization slowly formed. The man he fired might have been the reason he was a CEO at all. Daniel stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the factory floor. Workers moved like small shadows below him. For the first time, he felt uncomfortable wearing the title he once felt proud of. Meanwhile, rumors spread among the workers. Some said Elias had been a war hero. Others said he left the Navy after losing his team. No one knew the full truth. But everyone agreed on one thing. He never acted like he was better than anyone else. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind replayed moments he once ignored. Elias quietly helping others. Fixing mistakes without blaming anyone. Working late when no one asked him to. Why would a man like that protect this company? The next morning, Daniel received a call from the same Navy officer. Commander Grant has not contacted us, the officer said. If you hear anything, you must inform us immediately. Daniel hesitated before answering. Why does the Navy need him so badly? There was a short silence on the line. Because, the officer finally said, he finishes missions others can't. The call ended, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He walked back into the workshop again, stopping at Elias's empty station. The small wrench still lay there, untouched. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not control, regret. He looked toward the factory doors, half expecting Elias to walk back and like nothing had happened. But the doors stayed closed. And deep inside, Daniel began to understand something uncomfortable. Maybe Elias had not been protecting the machines. Maybe he had been protecting the people, including him. Days passed, but the feeling inside the factory did not change. The machines worked, yet something felt off, like a rhythm had been lost. Workers still talked about Elias in quiet voices. Some wondered where he went. Others believed he would never come back. Daniel Carter tried to focus on business, but his mind kept returning to the same question. Why would a Navy commander choose to live as a mechanic? The answer came when the Navy returned. This time, there was no helicopter landing in the yard. Instead, a black vehicle stopped quietly outside Daniel's office. The same officer from before stepped inside, his expression more serious than last time. "We need to talk," he said. Daniel closed the door behind them. "Have you found him?" The officer shook his head. "No, but you deserve to understand who worked in your factory." He placed a thin file on the desk. Inside were photos and short reports. Most details were blacked out, but enough remained to tell a story. Elias Grant had led dangerous rescue missions in war zones. Missions where soldiers were trapped, injured, or surrounded. Missions where failure meant death. Daniel flipped through the pages slowly. He saved his team more than once, the officer said quietly. But during his last mission, things went wrong. Daniel looked up. The rescue succeeded, the officer continued, but his entire unit was lost except for him. Silence filled the room. After that, the officer said he resigned, refused medals, refused promotion. He disappeared. Daniel leaned back in his chair, trying to process it. Suddenly, Elias's calm behavior made sense. The quiet attitude, the way he avoided attention, the way he focused on fixing things instead of talking. He wasn't hiding, Daniel said slowly. The officer nodded. He was trying to live with peace. Later that evening, Daniel walked through the workshop again. He stopped at Elias's station and ran his hand across the workbench. He imagined the man standing there, working slowly, carefully, as if every small repair mattered. Maybe it did. Machines could be fixed. People were harder. One of the younger workers approached him nervously. "Sir, can I say something?" Daniel nodded. "Elias once told me," the worker said, "that broken things don't need force. They need patience." Daniel felt those words settle heavily in his chest. For years, he had run the company with pressure and fear. Faster results, bigger numbers, no mistakes allowed. But Elias worked differently. Calm, careful, quietly helping others improve. And people respected him for it. That night, Daniel received another call from the Navy. "This is urgent," the officer said. "A rescue operation has failed overseas. Commander Grant is the only person who knows the terrain and the extraction plan. Without him, soldiers may not come home." Daniel stared at the phone in silence after the call ended. For the first time, he realized something painful. The man he had fired was not just important to the Navy. He was important to people everywhere he went. And Daniel had pushed him away. Outside, rain began to fall over the factory roof. Daniel stood by the window, watching the empty parking lot where the helicopter once landed. He remembered Elias's final words again. "You may regret this decision." Now, those words felt less like a warning and more like a truth. Somewhere out there, Elias was probably already helping someone again. Not for money, not for recognition, just because that was who he was. Daniel slowly understood something he had never learned as a CEO. Real strength was quiet. Real leadership did not need a shout. And real heroes did not tell their stories. As the rain grew heavier, Daniel made a decision. If Elias ever returned, things would be different. Not because of his rank or his past, but because Daniel finally understood the value of the man he had judged too quickly. But deep down, another fear began to grow. What if Elias never came back at all? The days after the Navy's visit felt longer than usual. Daniel Carter tried to return to his normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Meetings felt empty. Numbers on reports no longer gave him satisfaction. His mind kept returning to one person, the mechanic he had fired without thinking. Elias Grant. The factory continued running, but problems kept appearing. Small breakdowns turned into big delays. Workers argued more often. The calm balance that once existed had disappeared. Daniel began to notice something uncomfortable. Elias had not only fixed machines, he had quietly held people together. One evening, Daniel walked through the workshop again. He stopped at the unfinished engine that still sat on Elias's bench. Several mechanics had tried to repair it, but none succeeded. Daniel looked at it for a long time. He said rushing would break it again. Daniel murmured to himself. For the first time, Daniel realized how often he had rushed decisions in his life. The next morning, he made a choice that surprised everyone. Instead of going to the office, he left the factory and started searching for Elias. His first stop was a small garage across town. One of the workers had mentioned Elias sometimes helped there after hours. The owner recognized the name immediately. "You're talking about Eli," the old man said with a smile. "Good man. Fixed my compressor for free when I couldn't afford repairs." "Do you know where he went?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head. "People like him don't stay in one place long." Daniel continued searching. He visited a local shelter where Elias had repaired heating systems during winter. He spoke to people who barely knew Elias's full name, yet spoke about him with deep respect. He listened. One woman said softly, "Most people don't." Every place Daniel visited told the same story. Elias helped quietly and left before anyone could thank him. The more Daniel learned, the heavier the regret became. Back at the factory, news began spreading. International reports mentioned a dangerous Navy rescue mission gone wrong. Details were limited, but it was clear that lives were at risk. Daniel felt a cold feeling in his chest. The Navy needed Elias for that mission, which meant Elias might already be there. That night, Daniel stood alone in his office, watching the news replay the same short report again and again. Stormy seas, damaged aircraft, missing personnel. He realized something painful. If Elias was risking his life right now, no one at the factory would even know. The next morning, Daniel gathered all the workers together. It was the first time he had done that without anger. "I made a mistake," he said honestly. The words felt strange coming from him. "I judged someone without knowing who he was." The workers listened in silence. "He helped this company more than I ever understood," Daniel continued. "If he returns, things will be different." Some workers nodded quietly. Others looked surprised. They had never heard the CEO admit fault before. Days passed with no news. Then one evening, a Navy vehicle appeared outside the factory again. Daniel's heart raced as the officer stepped out. "Do you have information about Commander Grant?" Daniel asked immediately. The officer's face was serious. "No confirmed contact, but we believe he joined the operation voluntarily." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Is he alive?" The officer paused before answering. "We don't know yet." After the vehicle left, Daniel remained standing outside long after sunset. The factory lights glowed behind him, but he barely noticed. For the first time in his life, success felt meaningless. He thought about Elias working quietly, helping people without expecting anything in return. A man who carried heavy memories, but still chose to fix broken things instead of running from them. Daniel finally understood. Leadership was not about control. It was about responsibility, and he had failed that responsibility. As the night grew colder, Daniel looked up at the dark sky, listening to the distant sound of aircraft far away. Somewhere out there, Elias Grant was fighting another battle. And this time, Daniel could do nothing but wait, hoping the man he once fired would find his way back home. 3 weeks passed with no clear news. The factory continued to run, but everything felt slower, heavier. Workers spoke less. Even the machines sounded different, as if the place itself was waiting for something to change. Daniel Carter checked the news every morning and every night. Reports about the Navy mission slowly disappeared from headlines. No success announcement. No failure confirmed. Just silence. That silence was the hardest part. One early morning, before most workers arrived, Daniel stood alone outside the factory entrance. The sky was gray, and cold wind moved across the empty parking lot. He had started coming early lately. It gave him time to think. He was about to walk back inside when a distant sound reached his ears. At first, it was faint. Then it grew louder. Helicopter blades. Daniel's heart began to race. Workers started stepping outside, looking up at the sky. The sound became stronger until a dark Navy helicopter appeared above the factory, circling once before slowly landing in the same spot as before. Dust and wind filled the air. No one spoke. The helicopter door opened. 2 Navy officers stepped out first. Then a third figure appeared behind them, moving slowly. The man stepped down carefully, his arms supported by a sling. His clothes were simple, but his posture was familiar. Elias. A quiet wave of relief moved through the crowd. Some workers smiled. Others simply stood still, unsure what to say. He looked thinner, more tired, but his expression remained calm. Daniel felt frozen for a moment. All the words he had prepared disappeared from his mind. The mechanic he fired, the man he had searched for, was standing in front of him again. Alive. The Navy officer approached Daniel. "The mission was successful," he said. "Commander Grant made sure everyone came home." Daniel nodded slowly, unable to take his eyes off Elias. Elias looked around the factory yard as if nothing had changed. His gaze moved across the workers, the building, the machines. For a brief moment, a small smile appeared on his face. Then his eyes met Daniel's. The silence between them felt heavy. Daniel stepped forward. For the first time in years, he felt nervous speaking to one of his own employees. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said quietly. His voice was not loud, but everyone heard it. "I judged you without knowing who you were. I was wrong." The workers watched closely. They had never seen their CEO like this before. Elias studied him for a moment. There was no anger in his expression, only tired understanding. A job is just a job, Elias replied calmly. People make decisions. Daniel shook his head. No, I made a mistake. And this company lost something important because of it. Elias glanced toward the workshop. The machines are still running. Yes, Daniel said softly, but not the same way. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel said, I want you to come back, not as a mechanic, as someone who helps us do things the right way. Elias remained silent, thinking. The wind moved lightly across the yard. I don't need titles, Elias said at last. I only fix what I can. Daniel nodded. Then help us fix this place. The workers exchanged hopeful looks. Elias agreed to stay for a while, but only to train younger mechanics and help improve safety systems. He refused promotions, refused attention, and asked for no special treatment. Inside the workshop, things slowly began to change again. Elias worked beside others, teaching patiently. He showed them how to listen to machines instead of forcing them. Mistakes became lessons instead of punishments. Daniel watched these changes quietly. He noticed workers smiling more. Problems were solved calmly instead of through fear. For the first time, Daniel understood something important. Respect created stronger results than pressure ever could. A few days later, the Navy helicopter returned to take Elias for medical evaluation. As he walked toward it, several workers shook his hand. Some thanked him. Others simply nodded with respect. Daniel stood nearby, unsure if this would be the last time he saw him. Before boarding, Elias turned back. Take care of them, he said simply. Daniel nodded. I will. The helicopter lifted into the sky once more, disappearing into the clouds. This time, however, the factory did not feel empty, because the lesson Elias left behind remained, and it had already begun changing everything. Weeks passed after the helicopter disappeared into the clouds, but the change Elias left behind did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger with time. Carter Industrial Motors slowly became a different place. The shouting stopped first. Supervisors spoke calmly instead of raising their voices. Workers were encouraged to explain problems instead of hiding them. Repairs were done carefully, not quickly. Production improved, but more importantly, people felt respected. Daniel Carter noticed the difference every day. He no longer walked through the factory looking for mistakes. Instead, he listened. He watched how workers helped each other. He saw young mechanics using techniques Elias had taught them, slowing down, checking details, thinking before acting. The unfinished engine that once sat on Elias's workbench finally ran perfectly. The mechanic who fixed it said something Daniel would never forget. I just did it the way he showed us. Daniel realized then that Elias had never tried to change the company directly. He changed the people, and the people changed everything else. One afternoon, Daniel entered the workshop quietly. The old workbench where Elias used to stand was clean now, but no one had taken it over permanently. It felt wrong to replace him. Instead, a small metal plaque had been placed beside it. It didn't mention ranks or military honors. It didn't say commander. It didn't even mention the Navy. It simply read, respect every person. You never know their story. Daniel stood there for a long time, reading those words again and again. He thought back to the day he fired Elias. The anger, the pride, the need to prove control. At the time, he believed leadership meant being the strongest person in the room. Now he understood how wrong that was. Real strength was quiet. Real leadership meant responsibility, not power. Months later, the factory received a letter with no return address. Inside was a short message written in simple handwriting. Machines work better when people do. No name was signed, but Daniel knew exactly who it came from. He smiled for the first time in a long while. Life at the factory continued. New workers joined. Old workers stayed longer than before. Accidents decreased. Productivity increased. But the biggest change could not be measured on reports. People trusted each other. Sometimes when helicopters passed high above the factory, workers would look up for a moment, wondering where Elias was now. Helping someone else. Fixing another broken situation somewhere in the world. Daniel often did the same. One evening, As the sun set behind the buildings, Daniel stood outside watching the sky turn orange. He realized something important. Elias never needed recognition because his purpose was never about being seen. It was about making things better and moving on. Daniel turned back toward the factory entrance. Workers were laughing inside, finishing their shifts. The sound felt different now, lighter. Before going inside, Daniel looked up at the sky one last time. He no longer felt regret, only gratitude, because the man he once saw as just a mechanic had taught him the most important lesson of his life. That every person carries a story, and sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest strength. And from that day forward, Daniel made sure no one in his company was ever treated as invisible again. The factory lights turned on as night arrived, and somewhere far away, a helicopter crossed the dark sky, heading toward another unknown mission. But this time, Daniel simply smiled. He understood now. Some heroes don't stay. They just leave things better than they found them.